Do you enjoy fast and fluid combat, beautiful environments, and meaningful character progression? How about emptying your bank account for some pixel artwork? Not that well off? That's okay, because you can feed a cat every day just for an extra chance at the slot machine.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
What about challenging fights that test the limits of your ability to recognize and avoid boss mechanics while maximizing damage output? Oh, but you can't meet the DPS check because you keep rolling defensive stats? That's fine. You don't need to beat every challenge because you can relax and enjoy the sunset with someone special to you. That is until your graphics card overheats and creates a new sun inside your PC. Yeah, that's kind of concerning, but maybe you prefer to chill by yourself and solve puzzles or find secrets, until you realize that you might be stumped by a mobile game that even a child could beat. Well, how about just a casual game with cinematic gameplay mechanics and emotional storytelling? Then you might want to dive into this one. Wuthering Waves is an open-world action RPG created by Chinese developer Kuro Games, which launched in 2024 and has seen massive improvements to the game since then. If I could summarize the essence of Wuthering Waves as concisely as possible, it's a single-player MMORPG that takes the open-world immersive exploration of a game like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild or Genshin Impact, then adds in the fast-paced and skill-based combat of Devil May Cry, the addictive progression and collectible systems of Pokemon, the challenging bosses of Elden Ring, and finishes with the storytelling of Final Fantasy for a product that unsurprisingly works very well. Although it's clear that Wuthering Waves is nothing new or innovative, as there are plenty of these open-world gacha games inspired by the success of Genshin Impact, it still feels distinct because on top of giving the players what they want, Kuro Games excels at crafting stunning cutscenes, immersive backgrounds, and appealing characters. With the growing trend of disconnect between game developers and their customers, games that are just fun and give the players what they want can be quite refreshing. But with that being said, this is a free-to-play gacha game which always assumes the question of, should you pay with your time or your money? So if you're wondering whether Wuthering Waves is worth it to play, that was quite the tongue twister, then that is exactly the question I'll be answering in this video. As the genre is called open world RPG, let's start with the open world of Wuthering Waves, which is filled with many different activities. You can discover new places, solve puzzles, climb mountains, and complete combat challenges which all reward you with astrites, the main currency you need to earn new characters and weapons. This currency can also be purchased with real life money.
You got me.
Once you have those characters, you want to level them up by collecting resources and increasing your account level. As you level up your account level, or union level, you can then level up your characters to that threshold, and the world scales with you as you increase your account level. So the vertical progression is still there while allowing you to explore and do story in whatever order you want or at any level. You do need to level up to beat the endgame challenges, which won't downscale, but this can take several months to get your account level to max. Also, you can get more currency from the limited dailies or events when at higher union levels. So you can relax and take things at your own pace since there's no real need to progress fast. But if you're susceptible to that feeling of missing out on characters because you don't have enough currency, you may want to rush these events or spend real money to start getting value faster. There are various other materials that you need to collect to level up your characters that you can only get in-game, but to collect the rewards, you need to expend energy which recharges over time, meaning that at a certain point, you just have to stop. These time-gated rewards are how they get you to log into the game every day, which doesn't feel great at first when you want to keep playing the game. It's suggested that you always do activities with limited time rewards from events and dailies first, then do permanently available activities like story and exploration if you want to keep playing that day. This can start to feel like a routine or a second job after a while, and many would call this design anti-consumer, but there are many features that Kuro added to make these systems more consumer friendly, like the energy storage system, which means that you can take a break for longer and store at more maximum energy before it caps out. If you like to play every day, then you can still do that, but if you like to play for longer sessions every once in a while, you can still be rewarded by the energy you saved up. But whether the game tickles your dopamine receptors respectfully, the exploration, which isn't time-gated, can be pretty fun. The many different ways you can traverse the terrain feels amazing. You can climb or run along walls, glide, use a grappling hook, and eventually you can learn to fly. One of my favorite activities is called overdashing, which is basically just parkour tracks using all of the methods of traversal to race to the end. And maybe they could be a bit more challenging because sometimes they feel way too on rails. But there are plenty of other fun things to do, like solve puzzles, fight mini-bosses with specific challenges, or just find hidden chests. While these activities can get repetitive and the time-gated rewards might feel like you're under stress to optimize your playtime, there are still moments where you find yourself at the precipice of one of the masterfully crafted vistas in the open world, and you can just enjoy the ambience, the music, and the scenery without chasing a carrot attached to a stick. But then what is the point of the game? Why am I leveling up? Well, it's a collectible waifu simulator game. Essentially, each character has its own playstyle, which you might enjoy or not, but they can also buff the elemental damage or specific skill types of another character to create synergistic teams. So a character specializing in basic attacks and ice damage works well with other characters that buff those specific damage types. But theory crafting these can be extremely convoluted when you look at the walls of text in their skill descriptions. So most players either just stick their 3 favorite characters into their team, or just copy what the guides tell them to do. My favorite character is Kalkara.
Misery follows.
Who is just budget Sephiroth, but he's an electro DPS character, so he stays on screen most of the time, and he works very well with Yinlin, who's a more supportive DPS character because she buffs all of his damage types. I don't really enjoy playing her that much, but to play my favorite character, which isn't really the strongest character nowadays due to power creep, I need to play other characters that I might not like to make them viable. And I also want a support character who doesn't spend much time on screen. However, I also like Sanhua,
Lotus Parade,
who is one of the better supportive DPS characters because she has some of the coolest looking animations, unique and fun mechanics, and can perform her job quickly so she gets off screen sooner. But she buffs basic attacks, and I don't really like any characters that synergize with that. So when I swap to my Sanhua composition, I get a few seconds to enjoy her before I swap to another main DPS that I won't enjoy as much. Or if I stack all my best characters into one team composition, then I'll be gimping other potential teams. Or if one element is strong in this particular situation, I should level up a team composition based around that element. And I want to get a new character because Kuro is always making fun or overpowered characters. And I've got to wake up in 2 hours to go to work because I've been farming currency. And my bank account is dropping lower than ever, and So you can see the dilemma I have here. I can either play the team compositions that are the most fun for me, and not push the limits of how many rewards I can get when doing events or other DPS related challenges, or I can play optimal team comps that I don't really have fun with so I can get more rewards and therefore get more characters to play and have more options to try new fun stuff out more often. This is where the feeling of missing out really gets you, because this is a gacha game, and the main monetization method is through the dice rolls to earn new characters and weapons. The good news is that nothing you do in game requires you to buy power. You can play free to play and complete all content. However, if you want to own all the characters and their specific weapons, you'll need to cash in your paycheck. You can think of it as 3 different monetization methods. You can become a whale and buy all the characters and copies of them for thousands of dollars and get the absolute highest power level. Or you can play free to play and grind dailies and such, and you'll be able to get every other character they release on average, and maybe a new weapon once in a while. To be totally free to play, you need to have some self-control and save up your currency until you see a character that you really want more than the others, or just understand that you can't have every character. But gacha games are extremely effective at conjuring that feeling of missing out, with heavy marketing, power creep, and new unique character models. It can be tough, but Kuro is reasonably generous with their currency handouts and rewards. They've been known to give all players extra currency as an apology for typos in the game text, so Redditors can take another one for the team.
Yeah, boy.
Of course they do this because the more they give you, the more likely you are to keep playing their game. And the more you play, the more likely you are to get invested and spend money. Make no mistake, Kuro is making bank off of anime waifus. If you can control your need to collect everything and accept what you have access to in a mostly single player experience, and you enjoy the game, then it can be completely free to play. Of course, your time is worth money, and grinding for currency can take up a lot of your time, but Kuro respects the player's time. It's nice because even though you may not feel like logging in one day, you can get your dailies done super fast by skipping dialogue, spending time-gated currency in bulk, and fast traveling wherever you need to go. The third option is to become a paying customer, but going for the higher value options like the subscription fee, which is $5 a month, and the Battle Pass, which is $10 a month, which you can choose to go for either or both, and they give you a good amount of rewards, but require you to also play the game to earn them. So they aren't instant gratification if you need to buy a character right now, but if you pay a little bit every month, you can get a lot more rewards in the long term. If you have an issue with gambling elements in the game's primary monetization method, well, how do you expect them to afford development costs? It's completely fine if you just don't like it, but it's important to remember that this is a mostly single player game where you have MMO design elements like dailies, leveling, very light co-op that is never required, but you're not competing against others for resources. There are some high scores you can go for when doing solo challenges, but for the most part, these give you nothing and are completely intrinsically motivated. Your only competition is keeping up with the developer's release cadence, and Kuro is pretty reasonable when it comes to their monetization. In fact, Kuro has added many features that the community has specifically asked for, which I think is the main deciding factor that people have with monetization. If you don't like what you get, many people feel like it isn't worth any money to them, but for something that people really enjoy, they're willing to pay whatever because it's worth it. At the time of this video, there will be an anniversary event that will give plenty of rewards, so now is probably one of the best times to get involved. Since there's a high amount of goodwill built up with the community because of how generous the rewards are and how free-to-play friendly the game is, players are more willing to make in-game purchases, especially when the product is so enticing. At the end of the day, if you're having fun, have a bit of self-control, and play casually, then you won't have an issue. But if doing dailies, exploration, and events isn't fun for you, then you might need to make some decisions on whether you want to spend some money, stick to a small pool of characters, or just stop playing. What keeps me playing Wuthering Waves is the combat, as this is by far the most fun part of the game, and many of the activities in the game include combat. It's so easy to get immersed in the fast-paced action combat with perfect dodges and the ability to swap seamlessly between 3 team members in battle. Even though most characters can be simplistic to play, when working toward a strategy with your group at the same time as avoiding boss mechanics, it can get quite intense. Also, there aren't tons of keybinds you need to learn. You only need to dodge, basic attack, your character's skill, your ultimate, your character swap, your utility skill, and then an echo skill which you can customize from your collection. While this simplicity allows you to play it on your phone, desktop users still have plenty of complexity and skill expression with the rhythm and timing of these skills. Whether you press a button or hold it down can create 2 different actions. Managing evade frames is like playing a rhythm game, and creating combos with specific skill ordering can be extremely satisfying. As someone who is very picky about how combat feels in a game, Wuthering Waves has some of the most fluid and responsive combat I've ever seen. The boss fights can also be very engaging because they feel like Elden Ring encounters with how dangerous they can be, and you need to rely on learning the attack patterns. But it feels much better than Elden Ring because dodge timing is a bit more forgiving, team compositions can provide you much more sustain through healing and shields, and you can cancel animations so you don't have to sit there and stare at the boss until they make their move. Of course, Elden Ring feels more rewarding when you do complete bosses because of how punishing they are, but to me the moment-to-moment gameplay isn't as enjoyable, so Wuthering Waves has a nice balance by giving you more power and removing the punishment for dying while still giving you a challenge that you have to practice to overcome it. However, there is one major issue with combat. Although most of the game can be completed with any team composition, the most challenging bosses and events have time limits attached to them. Even if you can survive all of their attacks, if you can't kill the boss within the time limit, you fail. This does add more risk to the encounters because you can't just tank up and slowly whittle down the boss, but it also forces you to stick to optimal team compositions and promotes getting the latest power crept characters if you want to beat the DPS check. It's not a great feeling at first, but with skill and practice, it can definitely be beaten. It's just not the best design choice. Of course, Kuro is aware of this and has been adding more game modes that introduce difficult mechanics outside of a timer, such as bosses with lower health pools but more dangerous attacks, gambits or choices to limit yourself for higher risk but higher reward, and scaling mechanics that don't give you a time limit but do more damage to you the longer you take or the more you get hit. Despite these issues and the camera not working sometimes, the combat is an overall enjoyable experience that keeps you engaged in the gameplay that would be otherwise grindy or tedious. But while the combat challenges can get pretty hardcore, the game is mostly casual with story content patches every few months that release a new character to keep you invested. Sometimes the characters feel like arbitrary additions to the story just because they want to add a new character to sell to you every patch. I wouldn't say that the story is the strong point of Wuthering Waves, but Kuro's animators and designers create movie quality scenes. These big payoff moments are just a small portion of the actual story, which are often used to advertise how good the game is, but it isn't representative of the whole story experience. You still have your typical story dialogue scenes where you listen to someone yap as the setting and plot unfolds. And while it isn't close to the level of storytelling that you'll get in animes like Cyberpunk Edgerunners or Steins Gate, the pacing is still fast enough to move you to the next spectacle before it becomes too boring. You play as Rover, which can either be female or male, and no, there isn't a fairy that follows you around to narrate for you. You wake up with memory loss, and much of the story is about trying to uncover the secrets of who you are while trying to survive in a world where a calamity has caused much of the destruction of humanity. To me, the post-apocalyptic theme doesn't feel urgent enough because the open world is so relaxing to explore. It doesn't feel that dangerous. But one of my favorite environments in the game is the port city of Guizhou, the ruins of a metropolitan city which helps to better set the tone of the story, and it just looks so cool to explore. The dialogues between characters can also sometimes be a bit cringeworthy and cliche, even if they are a little bit funny, and whenever you make choices in the dialogue, it generally amounts to nothing. This is as linear of a story as it gets, but you can choose whether or not to do the companion storylines or side quests, and there's a good amount of voice acting and great directing and character gestures in the main storyline to bring the characters to life.
I thought you were... Wait a second. Did you actually fall asleep listening to my music? Oh. It kind of breaks my heart to know you reacted like that when it wasn't even a lullaby.
Each story patch generally focuses on one or two characters and fleshes out their backstory while progressing the main overarching plot. And while these stories can get very emotional as you learn about the personal conflicts each character faces, it can feel weird when every single character has some sexual tension with Rover, as if to suggest that you could be romantically involved with that character.
If only you could be mine, I'd root you in my garden, where only I could savor your sweet, robust vitality. Just kidding.
I know for a lot of people this keeps them happy, especially in China, because they're not allowed to go to adult websites in that country, so this is their next best thing. But after a while, it becomes predictable when everyone is so thirsty. This is absolutely a collectible harem gooner game, as there are way more female characters than male ones. But there are still enough male characters if you want to make a badass party composition with the boys, right? Right? The first story arc definitely lacks in many departments, but when you get to the later story patches, especially patch 2.0, the story gets a lot more involved and immersive. I know this is nothing special as immersive cutscenes have been in games for decades now, but there are many other similar games that still don't do this, so there's a clear step up in quality. And the story isn't just a dialogue simulator, It introduces you to the endgame boss fights, has some interesting puzzles and gameplay mechanics like controlling gravity. Wait, I know where this is from. Yeah, they're not hiding where they get their inspiration from. Like other established studios, Kuro Games is pushing the limits of quality with high-budget soundtracks and animated movies to make Wuthering Waves more than just a game, but a piece of art that transcends into other mediums.
But you already knew that.
However, Kuro Games hasn't had decades of experience optimizing and refining their gameplay experience. Although they have made other successful games like Punishing Grey Raven, they're still trying to find out what their niche is and what their players want. There are new game modes added frequently, and sometimes they're fun and players love them. Then Kuro gives them more development. Sometimes the players hate new content and Kuro tries to revamp or scrap it entirely. Regardless, they take player feedback all the time and react to it quickly, and because of this, the game is always improving. I started playing a week after launch, and almost a year later I have more characters than I really care to use. So if you like that feeling of progression that you get from collecting and leveling characters, but you don't want all the issues that come with your traditional MMORPG, like adhering to community expectations, playing what's meta, or waiting for others to progress, then you can play at your own pace. If you do like interacting with the community, then there aren't many ways to do so in-game, but instead, the modern gaming communities have shifted onto social media platforms like Discord servers or live streams, where you opt into social interactions rather than being forced into them. It's no surprise why Eastern game devs have started to gain popularity and Western studios have lost trust with their player base. With the rising complexity of the world and the increasing popularity of video games, the average player has less time to play and more things competing for their time when they do. So games need to either be consumer friendly, a lot of fun to play, convenient to play, or preferably all of the above. While Wuthering Waves hits pretty high on all of those categories, it also has many flaws such as power creep, shrinking the endgame, and making your OG waifus feel unloved, and limited time events or time-gated resources that make you feel like you have to keep playing or your account is bricked. There's always the question of whether it's too late to play. But power creep also means that new players don't necessarily need to get older characters, and time-gated rewards means that you don't need to rush to catch up. Take your time and enjoy it when you can, because that's the original purpose. Sometimes we forget this and get caught up in playing optimally, chasing extrinsic rewards, or thinking that there could be a better use of your time. But if that's the case, then you can just take a break whenever, since you don't need to optimize your time-gated resources, you don't need to own every character, and you don't need to get the maximum reward on every challenge. All you need to do is enjoy yourself. But if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe. Leave a comment so we can make sure that you aren't a Kuro bot, and I will see you all next time.